Hello guys and welcome to what is going to be the first episode of Tech Worth Your Time, which is going to be this new series which I'm starting of me basically biasly rating older pieces of technology and whether they're worth using in this modern day world, because there's actually a lot out there that we probably don't really remember or we don't really see on a day-to-day basis. So I'm basically just evaluating from my own opinion whether they are worth using today in this world. And so basically just gonna be a series where you join me there in a nerd way of basically giving my opinion on certain tech items. Now I'm gonna basically be starting off doing all the tech items which I own, and I thought I would start with the oldest tech item which I own, which is the Atari 2600. Now most of you know that I'm not as old as this thing. This was actually my dad's, and he gave it to me a while ago. Bit of a background story. This was basically the first video game console that I ever played. Because basically I was begging my dad for an Xbox. I really wanted an Xbox, and because all my friends were talking about them, I didn't even know what an Xbox was, to be fair. I just knew that it was a video game console, and I thought it was cool. And he was like, one day I've got a surprise for you, and he brought this baby down from the loft. Now, I had no idea what an Xbox graphics looked like, so for me, this could have been, at that time, this could have been the same or even better in graphical capability. And to be honest, it was a bit of fun, I didn't really think much of it at the time. I was just, I thought it was fun to be able to have something to play video game consoles on. I basically hooked it up to this like black and white CRT TV, and just play some games on it. So I'm just going to be reviewing it today because I actually just have it. I haven't played this since I last had it out because, well, I'm going to get onto it in a minute as part of my review of this console. But I do not own a CRT TV anymore, and I don't own any cables to hook this up, but I'll be getting to that a bit later. So this has just been sitting under my bed collecting the dust, so I thought I would bring it out for a free use for a video. So this is actually, I'm kind of cheating a bit here because this isn't the original Atari 2600. This is actually the junior version, which is why it looks a bit more modern, and it's missing the classical wood grains that you can see. This is actually, I think, like a 1983 console or something like that, so it is still fairly old. And to be honest, I think actually the design of it overall actually holds up quite well because it's very sleek, very small console. If you put this next to something like an Xbox 360, and I'll probably put a picture up here of what it looks like compared to my Xbox 360E, it's actually tiny and really thin. But there's probably a lot of reasons for that, so I'm going to be getting into it. So the first part of my rating is going to be about the system itself, and then I'll move on to a couple of other things like the controls, the games, and basically my overall judgment right at the end. If you don't really care about me waffling on, you can skip to my overall judgment. If you don't really care about my waffling on at all, I'm sorry, you are here and you're going to listen to me, and obviously whatever I say you do not have to follow. This is just my own opinion. And yeah, so nerd brain activated, let's hop into it. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to be talking about the actual system itself and a bit about what it is. So obviously, as you can see straight off the bat, we've got a couple of little settings. We can have colour, black and white. Obviously, we have the cartridge slot, and I'll show you an example of a cartridge so you can see about how big they are, but I will get to the actual games later on. You've also got a select and a reset button, and a couple of things at the top which are covered in dust so you can't really see. There's like a little channel port. You've got the left controller, so obviously you can only connect two controllers. You have a difficulty setting, which I've never actually used. Maybe there's only certain games that are compatible with this. And you've got the power plug right in the middle, and on the side you've basically got the port to connect to the TV, which for some reason is not labelled at all, so I'm not really sure why that is the case. And obviously you've got a lot of vents going on because obviously you've got to have that ventilage. The system itself actually does have 8-bit capabilities, and this is where it actually gets interesting because I'm sure you've all seen how different the Atari 2600 looks to the NES, which is also, as many know, an 8-bit console. Now it's actually a common misconception because 8 bits, or just like the number of bits, doesn't actually coincide completely with the graphical capabilities of a console, and there's actually a lot more that contributes to that. The Atari 2600 is actually quite flawed compared to some of its competitors, well, later competitors, because obviously this console, well, not this one specifically, but the original console came out in 1977, and obviously it wasn't until 1985, after the whole video game crash, which I'll get onto later, of 1983, that the NES came out. But the thing is with the Atari is it actually only had 128 bytes of RAM. And the problem is obviously not having much memory, obviously not much storage for all this graphical capabilities. And one of the problems with the Atari was exactly this, that it didn't have the processing for better graphics. And even some problems with it was that when you would connect it up to the TV, it would actually, the frames that appear would have to actually be recomputed as they were showing up on the screen, as the electron beams were hitting the screen. So it's all the console itself is quite light, and it's actually quite amazing that so many arcade ports were actually being able to put onto this console, because there's so many stories about having to squeeze all of these games which are on previously more graphically capable arcade machines onto this kind of sleazy console, if I would put it that way. But in a way, it's kind of a miracle console that so many games actually managed to get onto it. And in some, I guess, decent, or actually spelling it, decent ports. So it is quite interesting, but that is obviously why you will think, oh, they're both 8-bit consoles. Why do they look so different? Why is one obviously not as good as the other? Well, that's exactly why, because of this lack of RAM, which obviously we all know that RAM is quite important, because CPU processing, you're going to switch out instructions from the main memory, and obviously not being able to do this fast enough will result in bad graphics. And just bad outputting altogether. But there you go. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of the system itself. I'm just going to get on a couple more things about it. Something that's kind of got me interested actually is the plug. This plug is gigantic. I don't know if you can see it. I've actually wrapped all the thing up. Sorry, it's going to make so much noise. Here it is, little plug. It's actually gigantic. There must be so much in this that's actually powering. It's actually insane. Just shows you how old it is, because sometimes, like today, when you see a plug, it's like half the size of this. I just thought it's quite an interesting thing. As for the actual connection to this, I don't actually know what cable this is. I should probably know, but I don't. Yeah, but that's the power cable. But I'm going to talk to you now actually about connecting it to the TV, because this is where it gets interesting. So obviously many of you know that if you just have a CRT TV, you can directly plug your Atari into it. Now, we had a CRT TV, we'll just getting the cables down. We had a CRT TV in our house until 2019, so plugging this thing in wasn't a problem. But now, trying to connect this to a modern TV is a whole nother thing. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this. Right, guys, so I'm just going to quickly explain to you how you attach the Atari 2600 to a modern TV. So basically, there is kind of a confusing part, because there's several ways that you can do this. So if your TV has one of these coaxial ports and has an antenna, which basically means it can access analog channels. Now, I just want to make it clear that the antenna will probably not be visible on your TV, but you need to make sure that you can basically use your remote to flick through channels, and this means without using any surface like a Skybox or Now TV. If you can do that, basically all you need to do is buy one of these RF coaxial adapters for your Atari 2600. Basically, plug it into that port on the TV, but make sure the channel on here is aligned to the channel that you have set on your TV, whether it's channel 2 or 3, you can just do trial and error, and then you should be able to make these already work. If this is not the case and you cannot search for analog channels, you will be needing a VHS player, and it's very important that the VHS player that you have or choose has an antenna input port at the back, because what you'll need to do is you also need this coaxial adapter for your Atari 2600 cable. So you can basically plug the Atari 2600 into your VHS player instead of your TV. Now the VHS player will output AV cables, so if you have these ports at the back of your TV, you should be good to go. If you don't, you can get an AV to HDMI adapter here, and that will allow you to adapt to the HDMI port on your TV, which is quite common for only smaller TVs and monitors to only have a HDMI port. And again, basically what you'll do is, instead of using your TV to search for analog channels, you'll use the VHS player, which will have a channel button at the front, and just make sure you have the channel sets either 2 or 3, whichever one works for your input. And that is basically how you connect to a modern TV. Obviously, as you might be aware, all of this costs money, extra money on top. Buying your Atari 2600 in this modern day world, unless you already have one, and obviously you've already got the Atari and you don't actually have to buy it again. luckily I'm in that position. I've already got this and I didn't pay anything for it. And I probably will end up getting those ports just because, you know, you like a little bit of nostalgia. Sometimes you just like to plug in a really old console and give it a whiz. But yeah, obviously there's already a bit of a downside to the actual system itself, not being able to plug it in directly into a modern TV unless you actually have a CRT TV. Now, another thing with CRT TVs, especially on retro gaming, maybe going a bit off topic here, but obviously a lot of people, or a lot of retro gamers actually do have CRT TVs because obviously it makes the graphics look better, even though you can buy HDMI converters. AV to HDMI, AV is normally what retro consoles output to, unless, you know, you're getting a bit way back like this one. You know, even if you do it to HDMI, it's going to show a lot of the flaws of the time. If you're playing it on a CRT TV, you're not really going to see the flaws. You're just going to see the graphics how they were, and they were pretty good like that. So it's true that having a CRT TV will benefit your gameplay of retro games, but at the same time, if you've seen the prices of CRT TVs, you might think differently, and it's kind of crazy how that can even be sometimes more expensive than a modern TV, which is quite interesting. So it's whether you're really willing to pay out for a TV like that, but that's honestly up to your choice. Now, continuing on the actual system itself, I'm actually going to move on to the controllers. So I actually have two controllers. I have one that obviously came with the console, an original Atari controller, and I also have a third-party one. So I'm going to talk about the Atari one first, and I'm sorry for all the wires that are amassing on this screen. You're probably going to see quite a lot of wires, because the wires on these things are ridiculously long. And like this isn't even a thing, because sometimes I find really annoying about wire controllers is that the wires are so short. If you're going to make wire controllers, at least make long wires. And Atari have not failed here to make long wire controllers, because I swear these are pretty long wires. I'm not going to lie. Compared to like something like the GameCube, where I can't even like sit 1 meter away without having to pull the GameCube with me. So about the actual controller design itself, I actually quite like the controller. I think it's cool. It definitely does. Atari, obviously, I think their main goal was to bring the arcades to your home, which obviously at the time was a very revolutionary idea, because having to go out to play video games, you know, that was just something people were used to. Having them at home was not a commodity at the time. And so they really tried to keep the arcade theme, and that's something I really like about this controller. But the fact that you can put it flat on the floor, and it's like you're playing on an arcade machine because it's flat top like that, and I think that's really cool. I think that's a really cool addition. So I actually don't have much to complain about on the controller. It's got like the dial spinny top thing for certain games. We have to do like a radial little spin, which I think is cool. The actual joystick itself is a little bit stiff, but in the end of the day, we're talking about the early 1980s, so there's not really much you can expect from this. The buttons on the side, pretty good to be fair. I mean, they're not really that sticky, they're alright. I mean, obviously, Atari controllers have been in all sorts of conditions, but I'm lucky to have inherited quite a good one in quite good condition. And I just think overall, it's a pretty nice design. I'm not gonna lie. I think it probably would have been better if maybe, you know, obviously there's a lot of space here they could have added some other controls maybe to, you know, maybe some like actual buttons like to smash down, considering you've already got the joystick on the top rather than the side. But to be honest, I think it's alright. If you're holding it in your hands, it's, you know, you do kind of need 2 hands to hold it, which, you know, I mean, any controller normally needs 2 hands to hold it, or even 3. But yeah, I think it's actually a pretty good one. So onto the actual third-party controllers. This one's actually a joystick, and some games actually come, and I'll show you an example. They do say use with joystick controllers. Now, I'm not actually sure if that includes this or not, because this has still got a joystick on it. I don't really know, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's to do with joysticks. So this actually gives a very good arcade joystick feel to it. With the little rubber pads on the bottom, you know, this actually sticks really well on the surface. You actually can't see because this is in the way. Hold on, let me clear some room, and I'll show you guys. But actually, yeah, it actually stays really well on the surface, and moving around, it doesn't really move around much, which is pretty good. I actually do quite like it for that. So to talk about it more, the controller actually has a button on the top, which again is pretty cool. I think this would be really good for something like Galaxia, because you can, is it Galaxy? What I've got is Galaxian, I think. Galaxian, you know, Space Invaders, basically. But I think that would be really cool, because you can move it around and hit the button on top at the same time. I think it's actually quite a good functionality, and actually, to be honest, I think it's probably a better idea than having the buttons on the side. It's the only thing I don't think is that great about this. Having the buttons on the side, maybe on the top would be better. So yeah, this actually has pretty good functionality, and there's probably lots of other controllers you can get. You know, these are ones from the times. Like nowadays, they've probably got much more modern ones you can probably add as well. I'll have to have a look. If I can find some pictures of some, I'll probably add them in the video somewhere. If not, you'll just get a sad face because I just couldn't find any. But yeah, overall, I think the controllers are actually quite good. The only thing I think I was established about the system part, definitely a big downside, is the connection to the TV. Nowadays, having to buy more adapters is never a fun thing, and you may as well at that point get one of the, I don't know the name of it, it's like the big retro block thing where you have all the different ports and they all go out. I'll add a picture of like Amazon. It's like £65, so that translates to, I can't do maths, but yeah, it will be something similar in most currencies. So yeah, that is that. So now I'm going to move on to talking about the games. Okay, so I've actually cleared some space with all the wires because honestly they're really getting in my way, and I'm basically going to talk through all the games that I have first because these are ones I've actually played and have experiences with, and I can basically talk to you about whether I think they're good or not. And then I'm going to talk about some other games which I've never played before but I've heard a lot about, so I'll basically just be going for that. So I suppose I'm going to start with what's on the top, which is Pac Man. Now this is probably one of the most famous Atari 2600 ports. Actually, just on a side note, you know, as we're talking about the game, the actual cartridges themselves, I actually really like the cartridge design, if I'm honest. I think it's really sleek not to have, especially not to have the pins stick out, because that's always something that really gets me with Nintendo 64 cartridges especially, and just other cartridges in general. Always to state the pins, and that's always something that really gets me, because I just think, why did it have to be on show like that? It's just, and you know, you just have that fear of them corrupting. But I think like this, it definitely makes it much more robust. These have been under my bed for ages. I'm sure that when I plug them in again, they should probably still work. Because to be fair, even if you get a bit of dust on them, it's just on the plastic bit. Like this is just plastic. So I think the way they actually do the cartridges is really really good idea. But talking about Pac Man, so this is actually, yeah, as I said, one of the most famous arcade ports. Obviously, Pac Man, we all know Pac Man, the little yellow pizza guy. If you didn't know that, he was actually created from a pizza. And yeah, so this is actually a really interesting topic, and something I was actually going to leave a link in the description to if you want to find out more about the development of this game, because the creator of this game, well, not actually the creator of the entire game, but the developer of this port, Todd Fry, actually had a lot of trouble trying to put the arcade capabilities onto this very poor running, you know, low graphical capability console, which I think is quite interesting. It's definitely a very interesting story, so I'd recommend checking it out, considering he was pretty much, you know, a student who had like dropped out of high school and kind of like had fallen into this because he used to code all the time. It's a very interesting story, so I definitely recommend it. And if you happen to ever see this book especially, I definitely recommend picking this up because this has 3 pages detailing story. I'm just going to leave the Wikipedia link, but if you want to find out more about the story in detail, I definitely recommend picking up this book. I got this at a retro gaming convention thing in London, and it's definitely it's very good. So I definitely recommend it if you want to find out more about Pac Man on the Atari and other gaming things in general. As you can see, the cover says it all for you. But yeah, I mean, personally, my opinion on the Pac Man port, I mean, you know, the times I played Pac Man before, obviously just on my phone, mobile gaming, you know, I played this when I was like 7, so you know, I wasn't really thinking about the graphics, to be fair. And I think Pac Man is such a simple game, but the graphics can be simple as well. You know, I mean, I know we're talking really, really simple here because obviously already many are, you know, the actual arcade port would be considered by many as simple. But, you know, even though there's flashing ghosts to minimize the memory used and very, you know, blocky representations of the characters, I think that the game does its function. And I think if you like Pac Man, you will like this. You might think, okay, it doesn't look as great, but it's the same principle, it's the same Pac Man you know and love, and yeah, I would definitely still recommend it. This is one that I always wanted. This is actually not one that my dad gave to me, but one I actually picked up. I have 2 games which I actually bought. Well, I didn't buy, but I was bought for the Atari 2600 when I was a kid, so this was definitely one that I wanted to play, and I wasn't disappointed by it. And you know, I think most of these games can be picked up quite cheaply, so I definitely recommend picking this up if you do get an Atari 2600. Now, moving on, I have Millipede as well. So this is another one of the games that I bought off eBay. And this game, there's also one like it called Centipede. To be honest, I always get them mixed up. They're pretty much the same thing. I think this may be a sequel to it, or I'm not really sure. But basically, it's just a game where you have a big like centipede, you have to shoot it. Well, millipede actually. So it's silly me. Got 100 legs there. Basically, you have to like shoot it, avoid. It's actually just quite a fun thing. To be fair, it's quite similar to Galaxian or Space Invaders. Obviously, that sort of, like shooter, top-down shooter kind of game. So I definitely recommend both of these games. To be fair, I mean, Galaxian is always a classic. I mean, these are the sort of games that can run on this sort of console because, again, the graphics don't really matter. It's the playability of the game. And actually, surprisingly, as I said, the Atari 2600 is quite a miracle console because it still managed to pull these arcade ports off quite well. And, even though they may not have the best graphical capability, I think that the games themselves still hold a lot of their playability and just a lot of what makes them fun. You just have to have the simple concepts in there. And so, yeah, these are definitely games. These are the sort of games that just work with the Atari 2600, Pac Man included. I'm trying to pick it up. I have not got free hands. But these are sort of games that just work. And those are sort of things that I think they're simple enough concepts to grasp, and you only need the bare minimum graphics to actually play them. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend these three. Moving on, I'm just going to show this one next, because this one actually goes well with these ones. Now, pole position, again, this is another arcade port. This is not like an Atari 2600 made exclusive game. But I actually think this one's done really well. For what it is. If you play this game on the Atari 2600, you'll probably be quite amazed about how it runs, because the careful use of all the frames and just trying to make this game run on the lowest graphics as possible but still be fun, it actually works really well. So this one I definitely recommend, because I think that this is quite a good racing game for the time, and I think just the way it plays, the way it's laid out is really good. And again, I'm sorry I don't have any footage to show you. I would definitely put a little box up here with footage. But obviously, as I said, I do not have the cables to plug this into my TV at the moment. I did try to see if I could get it in. And I started getting excited when I saw an RF port on the back of my monitor, but it did not work. Obviously, I still needed the coax adapter and the AV adapter to actually do it. But I'm sure I'll get that one day and maybe post some gameplay. But yeah, this is definitely good. The only game I'm getting onto it. Yar's Revenge, right. Now, I have a bone to pick with this one because I never understood this game, right. I thought the game was about a mosquito being trapped in a room behind some glass. This game is one of the examples of a game which I think the Atari 2600 limits it. Because I feel like this game would be much easier to understand, much more fun to play if the graphics wouldn't hinder how it looks and hinder how it plays, because I never understood this game, and I'm hoping that there's people in the comments that agree with me that this game can be a little bit confusing at times, because it's when you see the graphics, I might actually, maybe if I can find a clip on YouTube, I might try and add one in, but it's the gameplay is questionable. I remember I had some like pictures up here of what it looks like, but it's like very flashy lights. And it's very hard to understand. Now, I'm sure it's probably great if you know what's going on, but I think it's one of those games that's hard to decode, and these graphics don't make it any easier. All these games I've showed you so far in this stack, which I hope I do not drop, they're simple concepts. They're things that are easy to understand, and they work for simple graphics. This, I think, would need something much more advanced. And I'm not sure if they actually made a remake of this game, but if they did, I think it would definitely be much easier to understand and definitely much more playable. But those are all the games I have for the Atari 2600. I'm just going to do a little talk about some of the other games whilst I leave these in the corner, so you can, I don't know, admire them in this little retro stack. Should I just like push that, make that look a little nicer? Sorry, you're just going to see a lot on my hands, but I don't really have anything to show. I'll probably just show some pictures on the screen or something. But some of the first ones I'm going to talk about, so I'm going to talk about some of the other games that people like on the system. I've heard Spider Man is very good, and I've seen clips of it, and I actually think it looks quite fun. I think I'd definitely pick that one up if I saw it. Again, you have to remember that obviously all of these games are on the 2600s, so again, graphical capabilities always, maybe might make it less fun for some, but I think that game actually looks really cool. I don't really need to explain it. It's your usual Spider-Man thing. You've got the Green Goblin and all that. Some different, several levels as well. So I think it actually looks pretty well made. So that's one that I've definitely seen recommended if you get the system. Another one is Adventure. Now this is actually considered a classic in video game history. And it's quite interesting because many people see it as the first action adventure game, and many people off the bat would see it as quite simple. It's basically you just play as this little square and you go around and you have to like collect items, keys to castles, and you have basically got some enemies which keep moving whilst they're off screen as well, and you got like bats trying to attack you and all this sort of thing. And I think it just looks quite interesting. Again, it's not something I've played, so I'm sorry if I mess up the description or not really do it justice. But it's something I saw online, and I think it does look very good. And there's lots of hidden Easter eggs in it as well that people noticed. And it's also that in that way involved into the story of Ready Player One, if you've ever played that book or watched the film. So yeah, you may have heard of it before actually, outside of this, but that is a game that was created for the Atari 2600. It also has an interesting developer story behind it, so I definitely recommend checking that out. Another game that's got a good developer story to tell. As for other games, Pitfall, I've also heard is very good, and I've looked at that, and I think that one actually looks really fun as well. Just like your normal 2D platformer, to be fair. And I actually quite like it. I think it's a game that was actually executed really well on the system. I think it's kind of made for the Atari 2600. I think it looks really good on that, and I think that's one of those games that, again, it's got a simple concept and it fits this simple graphic sort of box. As for the games that aren't as good, I think we all know one in particular. E.T. Rushed in 5 weeks of development, and notoriously known as one of, if not the worst video game ever, for just its lack of playability. So, of course, the Atari actually has this game, which very much contributed to the video game crash of 1983, but it also has many others as well. And I think it's just interesting that Atari was such a controversial system like this, and that it did have games which did well, but it also had games that didn't do well, and ultimately it was those that led to its downfall. And just E.T. is quite an interesting one. I actually find it funny that people do actually want to pick this game up for the price that is often sold online. Just to own it. And I've actually seen people who said it is quite fun. Again, it's probably a personal opinion, but what I've heard online is that it's probably not as fun as it seems. So those are basically some of my reviews on the games which are available. Again, I think it's all a question of whether is the game simple enough to fit with these simple graphics. There's probably not. Once the games start getting complicated and you can't really understand them very well, they just lead to frustration. And, considering at the time, the video game fan base, when the Atari 2600 came out, was mainly kids, you wouldn't really want your games to be very difficult. But obviously, we're not talking about them, we're talking about now, which leads me on to my final question. Is the Atari 2600 worth playing in modern day world? Currently, we're in 2024, but is it worth playing nowadays? Now, this is actually a very good question, isn't it? Because this is basically what I've just based my whole video on. And I'm just going to take my Atari 2600 and put it back into the frame as I conclude this video. I think that the Atari 2600, if you can pick it up cheap, because many people can get this from, garage sales, retro video game stores for not very much. I think it's definitely a piece of video game history. The Atari 2600 was the most famous early home console, and it showed that, you can still have fun playing games at home and maybe even in lesser graphics. And I think that almost stands for almost like a metaphor for what retro gaming is, because at the end of the day, nowadays, people that play retro games like myself, it's not about the graphics, it's about the playability, it's about the fun that the game offers. And I think the Atari 600 really embodies that that it's not really about how it looks, it's about, you know, whether it's fun. And I have to admit, of course, a lot of these games aren't really up to what we've been used to today, and I think that's basically the problem, because a lot of these games, you know, I mean, we can still find retro games that correspond with what we have today, open world adventure games, and, you know, fairly good graphics. I mean, nowadays graphics are excellent. They're almost real, hyper realistic. And so when you look back on this, it almost gets put to shame next to what we have now, like the PS5 or the Nintendo Switch or Xbox Series X. Honestly, I find it hard to keep up with all the Xbox Series, to be fair. So it's true that the Atari 2600 can often be put to shame next to these consoles, especially as it's one of the very early home video game consoles that came out. It's true that there's only a select amount of games that are worth playing. And what's interesting is you can actually play these in other places. I myself actually have an Atari game compilation on Nintendo DS with 10 classic games, such as Asteroids, Missile Command, Centipede. I told you that here we go. Here's the little. That's kind of basically what Millipede looks like. It's basically the same thing. But you can get, obviously, these compilations will give you a taste of what the game is, and in much better graphics as well, and without the need of having to buy a new system. And it's true, this was probably not very expensive either. I think this was like £5. So it's true that you can get these games other ways. Even the Atari console, which was released not that long ago, the Atari VCS, which is basically a game streamer console, you can even play these on better graphics with a console that was made by Atari itself. So there are lots of other ways to play the game, which I think is what kind of makes having an Atari 2600 less of an essential and more of a niche. So whether I think the Atari 2600 is worth playing today, probably not. Which is not a good start for my series. I'm already saying nope, nothing's worth playing. I think that this is only really something that, you know, some retro game collectors will want to have in their collection, because it's true the Atari 2600 really did help pioneer home gaming. It did help to show, of course, as I said, that it can be fun, but it was something of its time. And when I say that, really of its time, because the Atari 2600 had such a short lifespan, it was really something that really went in a blip of a moment. And, you know, after that, it became much less relevant, because it was really just something to demonstrate and probably not something to really continue. So that is basically my overall opinion on the Atari. I don't know if you agree. Let me know if you do agree in the comments. I would love to know. Honestly, your feedback. I'd really love to know. And I'm honestly happy to respond to any comments. If anybody has any questions, anything they think I messed up in this video, talking about the Atari. But I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you did actually come to the end of this video, I do really appreciate it. And I hope maybe if you didn't know as much as the Atari 2600 as you do now, that I hope you've learned something. And I hope you've just enjoyed it. So thank you so much for stopping by. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want, or if not, that is completely fine. And thank you for stopping by, and I will see you guys in hopefully the next video, or it will be Tech Worth Your Time, where I will be reviewing the Nintendo Game Boy. See you guys later. Have a great rest of your day.